All right, today we've got a very yellowed Macintosh LC here. Now, if you have an LC, LC2, LC3, LC475, and you haven't recapped it yet, you need to. A lot of people talk about unnecessary recapping, but with these machines, it is always necessary. The system board, as well as the power supply need to be recapped. If they work, they won't for long. And typically you shouldn't turn them on until you recap them because it can damage things, as the electrolytic in the caps that leaks can cause shorts on the traces and damage chips. I know this one has been turned on recently, not by me, but just wanted to power it up here and see what we get just for fun. We do get a boot chime, and typically when the capacitors have gone, the sound chip is taken offline by that. As you can see, we're not getting anything on the screen. I'll adjust the brightness here. Oh, there we go. For sure, it is booting, and it looks like it is happy with the OS that's on here. So that's good news. So we'll just let this boot up, and then we'll take a look and see what we have. All right, we're booted. Since there is no battery and no PRAM saved, it does default the resolution to black and white. And let's crank that up to thousands of colors. This is the appropriate monitor for an LC. And this runs at a resolution of 512 by 384. So you can see we do have color in thousands of colors, which I believe is 24-bit color. I could be wrong there. But we're running system 753 off the external Blue SCSI, and we do have 10 megs of RAM in this, which I do believe is the maximum for an LC. So this is a fully tricked out Macintosh LC. All right, that being said, let's shut it down, tear it apart, and replace some capacitors. And actually, as I am tearing this thing down, I see that it does have a hard drive in it. No battery, which is good. The batteries in these things will be a huge sore spot as they leak and destroy the system board. But there's a hard drive. This hard drive, I didn't hear it spin up, and obviously the system didn't see it, so I'm guessing that it's probably toast. No worries though, that's what Blue SCSI is here for. And also see there's quite a bit of dust on the system board, but we'll get that taken care of too. All right, let me continue to take this apart, and we'll get back to you soon. All right, well, we've got things taken apart here. So this is the system board here. You can see we've got a handful of capacitors here, and a couple up here as well. So I don't know if you can see it on camera. It looks like you can. You can see that this area around where the capacitors are looks like it's kind of wet or gooey, and it's definitely sticky to the touch. That's the electrolyte that's leaked out of these capacitors. So while it works now without issue, at some point in the future it will stop working. So we need to get these capacitors replaced, and we need to clean off the electrolyte from the board. As you can see here, there's these caps up here, and these ones don't actually look like they have leaked. I'm not seeing any sort of trace of any leaks up here, which is good. The less leaks the better, but they will leak. And as you can see here, these ICs, these little ICs between these caps, basically look like they're wet because there's so much electrolytic component around them. The traces all look like they're pretty okay, but we'll take a closer look. For my capacitor kits, they're, at least for the system board, they're standard caps. You do have to be careful on the power supply. There are different types of caps that are used, low ESR caps sometimes. But a company called Console 5 makes capacitor kits for vintage Macs. And if you're doing just one-off repairs, it certainly makes things easier because they send you all the right caps. You don't have to worry about finding the right things. As you can see those here. They do offer a tantalum or an electrolytic replacement set for most of the computers. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think it matters too much which way you go. Typically when tantalums fail, they fail short, which can be problematic in 15, 20 years. But we might have bigger problems at that point anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the tantalums for this repair. But again, it doesn't really matter in the short term which one you go with. All right, so we've got the soldering iron warming up. Now it's important to note where capacitors are installed before you start taking them off, because once they're off, it's very difficult to figure out where they are. Of course, you can go online and find screenshots of these boards, but better safe than sorry. So I always like to either take a picture or just jot a quick note down about where things are on the board, which I've done here. including polarity. Capacitors do have polarity, so if you put them on backwards, they may explode. And we don't want that. Now, one thing that is interesting to note is that the electrolytic capacitors, these ones that are installed today, have the polarity band on the negative side. So this 16 volt capacitor is negative this way, and the replacement SMD capacitors, they have polarity bands too, but they are on the positive side. So make sure that you double check that before you install a bunch of caps the wrong way and cause yourself a lot of problems later. Let me just pull one of these out and give you a sample of what I mean. So with the tantalum caps here, you can see there's the white bar. That's the polarity indication, and that is positive on these. So backwards from what's installed today. That might be one reason why some people don't like switching from electrolytics to tantalums, just because it does get confusing, I guess. But with that being said, I think we can start taking some of these capacitors off. Now, the internet has a great debate about how to take capacitors off. Should you desolder them? Should you use a heat gun? Should you twist them off? And it gets real heated. So I'm going to perhaps use a combination of these things. I've found that twisting them off for capacitors that have leaked, like probably all of these, works pretty well, because the leaking electrolytic component does cause the solder pads to basically be impossible to get off. You can try adding fresh solder to it before you get them off, but it's still really difficult. And since they leaked, the structural integrity of them is pretty weak at this point. So they are usually able to be twisted off. And also on boards like these, they're pretty easy to troubleshoot. If you do lift a pad, usually you can find a good place to bodge it in if you have to. I think patience is the key. You don't want to rush just twisting them off. You will lift pads that way. But we'll get started here, and we'll use the twist method to start with. And if I feel like it's not going well, then I will switch to something else. I just like to kind of rock them back and forth and see if, they are loose. Certainly not putting too much pressure on them. Some of these feel like they're in pretty good shape. Like this one feels like it probably can be desoldered. This one, I think we can twist off. Yep, that looks like it's coming off, no problem. We got at least one leg out. So we'll just kind of carefully twist it. I find that it's important to not just sort of pull up. Always do the twist method. Because once you start pulling up, that puts a lot of strain on the pads themselves, and that can cause the pads to lift. Let me grab my tweezers here so I can get the rest of these off. When you do the lift and pull method, the legs are very frequently still attached. They actually pull out of the capacitor itself. So you have to be careful not to lift the pad, removing what's left of the base of the capacitor there. So that one came off no problem. That one definitely leaked and definitely left some legs behind. So we'll obviously, of course, have to clean up these pads before we put the new capacitors on, but not a big problem. All right, let's get back to these guys here. All right, so we got one leg free, the positive side. Oh, and an additional note, most of the capacitors, at least on these early Macs, they do label on the board which side's positive. So as long as you remember that positive is the plus, then you should be good. Oh, not positive is the plus. So remember that the tantalum caps, the polarity band is a plus. All right, so we'll keep going here. We've got one leg out of this one. The other one's kind of being stubborn. Be really gentle, and again, I'm not going to lift up on it. Just going to twist it, maybe with my fingers here, to see if I can get that metal to break without straining the pad too much. And there we go. We got that one off. On to the next one. And you can use a heat gun to try to remove these two, but typically when you're heating up an area of the board this small, there are ICs next to them, and you know, you can knock those loose and cause solder bridges and things. I'm really not a fan of using a heat gun in areas like this, and especially over here where there's the plastic ram clips, because those will very easily melt with a heat gun that close to them. You can use Kapton tape and try to protect them, but again, I think that's just more work than is really required, since the twisting method for leak capacitors does seem to work pretty well. Have I ever lifted a pad doing this? Yeah, of course. I think everybody who gets into this hobby lifts a pad a few times as they learn on their craft. So, you know, if you're a novice board repairer, you know, maybe you can find a junk board of the same vintage. You know, you can always check Goodwill for random electronics that might be there, that you can work on. You know, and if things go horribly and you lift pads, you don't really care. Certainly you don't want to practice on, you know, something that's very special. There are a bunch of people out on the internet that will recap your vintage boards for you if you're not comfortable doing it. But, you know, it's not that hard. It's a skill that can certainly be learned by just about anybody. So if you wanted to get into the hobby, I think that's a great skill to have. We're making good progress here. We're getting most of these off without any fuss. The old grip and twist method seems to be doing everything we're hoping it would do. And again, not lifting up, even though it's really tempting when they get loose. Just continuing to twist until everything pops off. And again, I'm not going too far in any one direction at a time. I'm not doing like, you know, a full 360 revolution one way. You know, you start and kind of get wider and wider in your rotation until they pop off. If you just grabbed it and torqued all one way, certainly could be worse for the solder pads that way, but, you know, kind of a back and forth motion really weakens the legs and weakens where they're connected and makes it easy to just kind of twist them right off. Fingers for this one. And we got the legs sticking up through the plastic still. Just kind of pry that off. There we go. A couple more to go over here. Making good progress though. Yeah, this one is definitely leaked. Very weak on the board. That one came right off, no problem. And this one as well. So I think this is the sound chip here. Again, I'm not 100% sure on that. I could look up some stuff online, but it doesn't really matter in this case. But because it's surrounded by these capacitors that leak when you have an LC that hasn't been recapped and the sound's not working, it's because it's surrounded by these capacitors and they've leaked. All right, got that one off. This one's a little tougher because it's kind of in tight quarters, but I think we can still get it. And it's definitely leaked as well. That is super loose. Give it some good twists, and it should pop right off. There we go. And that leaves just these three over here. So again, I'm not sure these ones have leaked. There's not really any sign of it, but they're old. They will leak. And twisting method seems to be working okay without lifting pads, ideally. We'll find out here shortly if I've made a huge mistake. So far, it seems like we're okay. That one came off, no problem. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, there's definitely goo underneath. So that one had leaked. Bunch of goo in this area we'll need to clean up. So they leaked as well. Not surprising. And this one's definitely leaked. It's super loose. And I'll use my fingers to get that rest of that one off. Left the plastic behind. And there we go. That leaves just one more. And this one's definitely leaked as well. Get right off. Yep, you can see the discoloration on the silkscreen on here, the yellow on the pads as well, where the solder is. So yeah, all three of those had clearly leaked. All right, well, next let's get to cleaning off these solder pads. For that, I'll be using my soldering iron. I'll also be using some soldering braid, some solder wick as it's called. So let me just snip off the extra here. Actually, I've got some new solder wick here I wanted to try. This was recommended by Adrian Black from Adrian's Digital Basement. He says this is his favorite wick, and I don't know that I currently have a favorite, but I needed some more, and I thought I'd give it a try. So it's just a No Clean Super Wick. So we'll get it open. Previously, I've been using just, some generic wick that I got off of Amazon here. Yeah, I don't even know what brand it is. Just got Chinese writing on it, so I can't read that. But no problem. I'm sure they probably come from very similar factories anyway. All right, and the key to any sort of solder operation is plenty of flux. The flux I like to use is the Chip Quick. There's a couple different types they have, but the No Clean tack flux is pretty good, at least from what I found. So I'll be using this to help out with getting some of these solder pads cleaned up. So let's start with these three over here. Put a generous amount on this one, and over here on this one, C15. So now the goal here is to not only get those little chunks of capacitor leads off, but to also clean the pads so that they'll take new solder without any sort of issue. So that one cleaned up really easily, and the little leg came with it. Same there. Sometimes, depending on how much these capacitors have leaked, this can be a very arduous process to try to get these things clean, but we're in luck at least with these first three that I've done. And you can see here that the leg is stuck on the board. I'll use the tweezers and try to get that loosened up. There's one leg here. And the other leg's still on the pad, needs a little more solder braid. And I say the solder braid does seem to work really well. So thanks, Adrian, for the recommendation. I mean, not that he personally recommended it to me. He talked about it in one of his videos. And when you're watching YouTube, it's kind of a personal connection, right? Like, you feel like they're talking to you. Like right now, I'm talking to you, Kevin. All right, let's get this last one over here cleaned up. And that one came off no problem. Same with that one. I see a capacitor leg still stuck over here. I'll get that out of the gooey solder wick. And that side all looks pretty good to me. So let's switch it around, and we'll work on all of these pads over here. Make sure they're on camera. Hopefully you can see them. All right. So I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure I don't miss any. So we got one here. We got one here. We got this 47 here. And then these 3 16s. And then we've got a 10. Actually, that is 100, I think. As is this one. This one's 10. This one's 10. This one's 10, and this one is 47. Now the 47 is very common for a lot of these beige 68K Max, so I've got a whole spool of those because they're everywhere. This board only has 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's kind of unusual, but no worries. All right, we've got the flux on, so let's get to work getting these cleaned up. We'll start here. And that came off very nicely. When you're cleaning these, you got to make sure to keep the braid away from any of the plastic components because it will melt. It does transfer heat. It's copper. So, again, be careful with what it's touching. And be careful of the soldering iron because, there's plastic audio ports right next to where I'm working. You hit those with the braid or the soldering iron, and that's not gonna look great and may damage it. The audio ports can be replaced if you do have an accident, but it's better to just be careful of what you're doing. All right, so we got all those cleaned up. I did see 1 or 2 legs sticking around here. Here's one. Pick that up with the tweezers. Maybe. Come on, little guy. All right, let me grab some newer tweezers. I think those ones are a little bent. These ones are a little sharper. They're also a little misaligned. All right, we can just bend that back, no problem. All right. I'm having trouble with tweezers today. That's unusual. Tweezers usually not the hardest part about a resolder. We'll just use the flux and a Q-tip to pick up that leg. And there we go. We got it in the Q-tip. All right, on to the next group. We'll start here with C5. Go over to C111. And on to C6. Oops. And that leg is there. See if we can pick it up. I think we got it. Nope, there it is. All right, we'll use the Q-tip method again to try to scoop that one up. There, we got it. Just a couple more to go here. I do like to snip the end of my solder wick off, just so it stays out of the way. Definitely can keep spooling it out, but I find it easier to control where it's going and not burn things on the board if you snip off the used portions every once in a while. All right, I think this is the last one here. And we got legs that don't want to let go. I think we got them. I'm not sure where they went. Let's do a little sweep here so we can find them. Yeah, I think we must have gotten them. Must have stuck to the braid after all. All right. So now we want to do some cleaning. We'll need to clean the flux off after. We're going to put more flux on to put on the new capacitors. So there's not really much point in cleaning that now. But we do want to get all this electrolytic component off the board. If it's under capacitors, it's going to continue to eat away at the board, the traces, just about everything. So we're going to do a little bit of cleanup here. So first I'm going to use a Q-tip and just kind of scrub the areas. The legs on these ICs definitely discolored, but that cleaned right up. That's a good sign. That means that the legs themselves weren't actually corroded, but instead just covered in some goo. Clean up this little IC here. Same story there. Cleaning up pretty nicely. Move my box of Q-tips over here so I don't have to keep reaching over. All right, things are looking pretty good. Probably why this board was still working. The leak hadn't been either bad enough or long enough where it caused any real harm to the board, which is excellent news. Certainly have worked on boards where they have been unsalvageable because of capacitor leak. Battery leak, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Those can be pretty unsalvageable, but capacitors definitely can kill your board too. So if you have a Macintosh vintage, it does need to be resoldered 100% of the time. All right, so I think all the ICs are looking pretty good. All the little SMDs are looking pretty good. So I think we lucked out here, which is great. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour some straight rubbing alcohol on the board and use my favorite tool, the electric toothbrush. It really helps get the gunk off. And then once I'm done with that, I'll give it a quick rinse with some more rubbing alcohol. All right, and of course it's 99% IPA, like I always use. So we can continue to work on the board. There's no worry about having to let it really dry. Obviously you don't want it to be liquid still, but it dries so quickly that you don't really have to worry about it. The 68020 processor here also has some discoloration of the legs, but that cleaned right up with the toothbrush, so that's good news there. Let's kind of go over all this area with the toothbrush to kind of try to really clean things up. We don't want any of that stuff on the board when we're done. And a little bit over here won't hurt either. Oh, this side looked pretty good. As I'd mentioned, I wasn't sure that these ones had even leaked. Clearly they had, but I'll just clean them up anyway. All right. Looking pretty good, so I'm just going to take off camera a little bit of my rubbing alcohol and just kind of clean this area off and flush everything off the board. All right. So we'll recap the isopropyl alcohol because it does evaporate pretty quickly. And we'll just kind of use this Q-tip to dry this area here a little bit because that's where I wanted to start. I think we're done with this solder wick for now. Again, seemed to work really well. I liked it. Now we don't need things to be super dry because the heat from the soldering iron will cause the rest of the rubbing alcohol to evaporate. But, getting off as much as we can before we start working, certainly not a bad idea. All right, so back to the flux. Put some flux on the pads here. And get my solder out. For this application, I'm going to use some 6040 solder. It flows a little bit better. Not really used in commercial production anymore because of the lead content, but it certainly makes the rework easier. And these boards more than likely were done with lead solder anyway. So right now I'm just tinning the pads a little bit, getting some solder on these pads so that it's easier for us to put the capacitors on when it's time. And the flux just helps that solder flow. All right. Cool, so let's start with those three. So checking my notes, those are all the 47 capacitors. So I noted there was 4 of those. And there's a 50 here as well. So the 50 might be the same as the 47 in the replacement kit because they're pretty close and it just makes it easier for packaging and distribution of the capacitors. So I'll take my 47s here. I've got 5 of them, and I noted that we do have 5 on the board. Okay. All right, so I'll get this package open. And as I'm opening it, again, we'll note that the polarity band on tantalums is positive. And as noted earlier, the board is labeled very nicely for us. So we can use that to help us get these in the right position. So positive to my right, your left for this first one. I'll line it up here. And we'll just get that solder melted to it. Oops, moved it too soon. Not quite where I want it. Move it a little more. All right. And we'll solder the other side. like to push down on them while I do this. Kind of helps make sure everything's connected. And then I'll go back and redo the first one to make sure that it's all the way down. Oops. So let's see here. Seems like that one's on pretty good. It's at a little bit of an angle, but that is okay with me. And the polarity band is to positive. I like to double check after I put them on, just to make sure I did it right. Again, we don't want to make that mistake. Have I made that mistake in the past? Yes. Have I caught it before I powered on the board? Also yes. All right, so let's get this next one on here. I do need to move the board around a little just to make sure we're getting things connected without burning other things. That one's on there nice and tight. Then we'll just push down the first side again. All right, looks good. One more of these to go. Polarity band to positive, which is exactly what we want. Oops. All right, that looks like it's on there. Great, so that is that. Now we have all of these left to do. We'll start with the two 47s. So that's C9 and C6. I think, just double checking here, 50, 16, 16, 16, 16. 47 is C4. C6 is a 10. So C4 and C9 are the 47s. So let's get the flux back out. I'll tin up C4 and C7. Actually, my mistake, C9. Good. I'll do this one. It might be a little bit too much on that one, so we'll just kind of move it to the outside so it's not in our way. All right, I'll grab these last two 47s. Make sure that the polarity band, which is positive, is going towards the plus on the board, which in this case is going to be toward the camera for C7, or sorry, C9. Oh, away from the camera for both. All right, that was on there. Polarity band to positive. And then we'll do C9. All right, I think we're on there as well. Maybe a little more on the top. Yeah, that's better. All right, so that leaves a whole bunch of 16s and 10s. Apologies, my water heater's running down here. So there's a little bit of background noise. Sorry about that. So onward and upward. I need to next tin these next set of pads here. I'm just going to do them all at once. So we'll get the flex out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got that one ready for 8. Let's just check. 1. Oh, missed these 2 up here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Missing 1 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, that's all. I miscounted. I counted this one. All right. Let's warm the soldering iron back up. I turned it off. Might be enough residual heat still. Nope. We'll just give that a minute to heat up. While we do that, I noticed that I don't have a 50 volt capacitor in my kit. I think that might have been an oversight from Console 5. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to send me one if asked, but I do have some 47 volts, as I'd mentioned earlier, so I'm just going to grab one of those and use it in place of the 50 volt. Now it's going to be electrolytic, not tantalum, but that doesn't matter too much, so no worries there. So like I said, I got a whole roll of 47s. Now I'm just going to find that 50, make sure that it is close enough to that. 4760. 4716. 4716. 4716. 4716. There's the 10, the 100, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. All right, so it's 50 volt. 150 volt. All right, I am back. So I double checked, and the kit I'd received was missing the 1 microfarad 50 volt cap. Now I'm sure I could reach out to Console 5 and they'd be more than happy to send me a replacement. However, it's no big deal, as I do have some of those spares on hand. So I'm gonna just use one of those. Now it's not a tantalum, it's an electrolytic, but no problem. You can mix and match if you like. So I'm gonna get this one connected, remembering that the polarity band is negative on these. So I'm gonna tin that one, so that goes on C100. Get some solder on there, and get that one soldered in place. All right, looks like a good fit. I need to double check the ones that I have here, make sure they're right. So we'll get back to that one, but we'll do all of the 10 microfarad 16 volts here as I spill them all over my workbench. That's fine. All right, so I do need to tin all those pads quick, so I'll just go ahead and do that. All right, one more to go, I think, and that should be it. Let's double check, make sure I got them all. Nope, missed one. C111. Alright, so that should be it for tinning of the pads. Now I'm switching back to tantalums, where polarity band is positive. Let's get these all taken care of. So we'll start with C105, 10 microfarad, 16 volt, polarity band going positive. Move these guys out of the way a little so I don't spill them. So that's going to be this one right here. I'm going to put a little more solder on that one. I'm not sure I put quite enough on. That should be a good connection now. And again, being really careful of these plastics that are right next to it. All right, one down. We'll do C105 next, which is 10 microfarad, 16 volts. Polarity band is positive. Okay, that one's on there. A little off center, but no worries. Polarity band positive. And I see on C5, the one I just put on, I did do it backwards and I didn't double check my work. So I need to take that one back off. So I will use the solder wick for that. All right, came off no problem. Actually, it did solder itself to this pad here. Let's just move that. There we go. A little more. So I will need to retin those. That's why it's good to always double check polarity band positive, and let's go flip it around. All right, and we have our first lifted pad. And it was because of a simple mistake I made, where I didn't double check before I soldered it in. But as I'd mentioned, it is pretty easy to work on these boards for the most part, and this one just goes right from here to this trace here. So that'll be a pretty simple bodge. So I'm not too concerned about that. It does make things a little ugly on the board, but you know, at this point it is what it is. So I'm gonna grab some wire wrap wire. I'll take a tiny little piece off. There's not too much to it. That should be enough. All right, so I'll melt the end off. All right, and we need to solder to this via here. So I'll use some flux for that. And I'll see if I can't tin that. All right, good. Just cleaning up a wire here. So we'll solder that onto that via. This would be easier if I had two right hands, but I don't. All right. That's good. I'll put some more solder on just to make sure that it's nice and stable. Looks good. And then we can just move this wire up to here and snip it off. I'm gonna use my side cutters for that. It's a little smaller than what I'm working on. All right. And then we'll tin that end of the wire. Maybe you need a little more flex on that. There we go. Looks good. Now to put this back on. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit. Got some flux on it, so I can't quite see the polarity band. And there we go. All right, so polarity band is positive, which is what led to this whole problem in the first place. All right, so we'll do the wire side. Actually, let's do the other side first. Make sure we have a good connection on there before we connect it to the wire. And then we'll get that wire connected. I'll put some good amount of solder in there to make sure it's a good connection. It looks pretty good to me. And I think that's probably worth a test with the multimeter. My multimeter in continuity mode. Yep, seems like that's a good solid connection. And that's on there nice and tight, so that's not going to fall off. Crisis averted. Now, this kind of stuff does happen with these vintage electronics. You know, no matter how you take these capacitors off, you can lift pads. It's always a risk you run. So, you know, being able to bodge is certainly a good skill to have. Schematics really help with it, but they're not always available for these vintage Macs, unfortunately. All right, so back to where we were, C3, which is another 10 microfarad 16 volt. And we got polarity band positive. Oh, it just escaped from me here. And it escaped again. All right, we'll take a little break here while I fix this one. All right, got that one on. I think it was another lifted pad. I did put a wire on just to be sure. I wasn't 100% able to tell with the multimeter if it was lifted or not, but better safe than sorry. And that's another via that was really close, so not a problem to just do that. All right, on with things here. All right, so we're gonna do C1 next. C1, 10 microfarad, 16 volt. stripey stripe goes to positive. Oops. Try that one again. I'm going to put a little bit more solder on that one. I think it needs a touch up. Alright, and we'll do this side. Looks good. Alright, onward. C111. We'll do next. So positive there is away from the camera. That is sticking up just a little bit. There we go. That a little more flush. And I'll just drop a little more solder on this side. Seems good. All right, a couple more to go. This one's got some flux on it, so I need to clean that off so I can see the stripe. All right, so we'll do C6 next. C6 is also 10 microfarad, 16 volt. And the stripe is positive, so that'll go here. I think we could use a little more solder on this one as well. There we go. So I think we got T left, C7. 10 microfarad, 16 volt. Positive goes towards the camera. Do a little more solder on that one as well. Oops. Come in and get this side. All right, looks good. Touch up the first side again. Yeah. All right. So C800 microfarad, 6.3 volts. I think we're missing one. C108, 10 microfarad, 16 volts. So that's going to be positive this way. And this one's definitely going to need a little bit more solder on both sides. There we go. double check them all, make sure they look good. So check all the stripes, make sure they're positive. Stripe, 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 positive, positive. Can't really see that one, but oh, there's the stripe, positive, stripe to positive, stripe to positive. All right, I got this C15 over here backwards, so let's fix that while we're here. And hopefully we won't lift the pad here. All right, got that one off, no problem. Retin these just a little bit. And we'll put that one back on with the stripe facing positive and not backwards like I had it. All right, I was able to confirm the value of that last capacitor, so let's get that installed. This is the tricky one. It's in a slightly hard to reach place. So I'm going to do some left-handed soldering. I got the stripe towards center positive. All right, I got the tricky side done. And the easy side. All right, so I believe that's it. So now I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup on it to get all the flux off, because flux does eat through circuit boards and traces. Using my favorite method here, just dumping alcohol on and hitting it with a toothbrush. This will also test my connections to make sure that everything is still good. It does put a little bit of pressure on the capacitors, so if something isn't quite right, I'll see it moving around, but everything looks like it's good here. All right, and we'll get these last couple of guys here, just using the residual alcohol on my toothbrush. And we'll give it a quick rinse, just to flush the board off, get everything cleaned up. All right, so next we're going to do a little power test, see how it works. Be back shortly. All right, so I've got it hooked up to a monitor, got it plugged in, and let's power it on and see if we took a nice working computer and broke it completely. Well, good news, the sound still works. See if we get any video here. Remember, it was kind of slow before to start sending video signals, so there we go. So no cool explosions, and it looks like it's trying to boot. So I think we can call that a successful recap of the system board. So next up, the power supply. I think I'll tackle that on a different day. But thank you for joining me on this exciting adventure today. We got to see how to recap a logic board, how to not put on capacitors, how to double check to make sure that they're right, and then how to fix lifted pads when we put them on wrong and have to take them back off. So thank you for your time today, and we'll talk to you next time.